There are plenty of examples in fiction where time travel is used as a plot device to further the story. Most often, it's used to convey some message about the main character, the world, or something of that nature. Back to the Future, Doctor Who, Bill and Ted, Dragon Ball Z are all examples of a story that has some sort of time-traveling element. I put out a video about Jak and Daxter a couple of months back, and I got a lot of people commenting to me about when I said Jak is a descendant of Mar and not Mar himself. I wanted to make another video to talk about Jak and Daxter, so I thought this might be something worth exploring. But you know me, it could never be that simple. I don't want to just do a video exploring whether Jak was Mar or not, since that's been done already. So,
Find yourself, Jak!
to explain time travel in Jak and Daxter, we have to explain the concepts of time travel that we have here in the real world. Because that's 100% something that does exist. There are three main types of time travel that are used in most fiction, with some additional versions here or there that are used less. For the sake of this video, let's focus on these main three. The first one is closed loop. This version of time travel consists of one constant timeline that you cannot make changes to. So, what does this mean? Well, let's say you traveled back into the past and then decided to throw a rock at yourself. In that instance, you will have always thrown that rock at yourself. This version of time travel stipulates that you cannot actually affect the past. Instead, any actions you do in the past will have already been done by your future self, meaning you cannot actually change anything. We see this version of time travel in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. In this film, there are a number of events that happen because the characters' future selves make it so, and it will always happen that way. The second version of time travel is open loop time travel. This one is essentially the opposite of closed loop, and allows for changes to be made to the past. This is where the trope of people saying, "Don't step on a bug in the past because who knows how it'll affect the future," comes from. Most people think of this version of time travel when it's brought up because there are plenty of popular examples out there. Back to the Future is one of the most prominent examples of this type of time travel. If a change is made in the past, like, for example, Marty giving his father the courage to punch his bully and also giving him the idea of space invaders from outer space, then it transfers to the future where Marty's father is now wealthier and more assertive. The last one we'll cover in the scope of this video is parallel world time travel. This is one of my favorite versions of time travel. This stipulates that every time that someone travels in time, it creates a separate universe which now has different events that play out that are affected by the time travel. Let's say in the future you stub your toe and you want to go back in time to prevent that from happening. You can do that, but when you travel back in time, you create another version of events where you no longer stub your toe. The thing about this is, you will still have stubbed your toe in the past because you didn't change your own personal history. Instead, you changed history and created an alternative version of yourself. One of the more prominent examples of this in recent memory is Avengers Endgame. They explain and exemplify this concept quite well, at least until they get to the very end. But we won't talk about that. In this instance, we can have a universe we came from where Loki is captured and taken to Asgard, but then going and changing the events of the timeline, you can have a universe where Loki escapes using the Tesseract. Both series of events now exist simultaneously and are equally real. So when thinking about these three forms of time travel, which one fits into Jak and Daxter lore the best? Well, let me explain. We won't pretend that time travel was something that the developers had on their mind the entire time they were developing the story. This was definitely something that came about during the development and implementation of the second game, Jak 2. That being said, we do unlock a door with 100 power cells at the end of Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy, which then turns out to be the Rift Gate and the Rift Rider. This is shown to us and explained during the events of the next game, Jak 2. The Rift Rider is probably the most important object in regards to time travel in the Jak and Daxter series. Firstly, time travel seemingly needs two parts, a Rift Rider and a Rift Gate. The rift gates are a concept that is unknown to us. They are seemingly circular gates constructed by precursors for some reason. They are an unknown construction, most likely created using precursor metal, but we don't really know how they work or what their main purpose is. We do know that there are other examples of them around the world. This is what we learned from Metal Core when he says the rift gate is opened at the beginning of Jak 2.
Finally, the last rift gate has been opened.
What are those things?
The second thing needed for time travel is the Rift Rider. The Rift Rider is interesting for multiple reasons. I will be focusing on two. The first reason is because this isn't really anything special. Aside from two parts of the Rift Rider, the Heart of Mar and the Time Map, the rest is constructed with parts that are human-made. Kira constructs a duplicate Rift Rider of various parts in order to replicate the original they saw. This then brings us to the second point about why the Rift Rider is so important. The one that Kira creates is the exact same one that they take back in the first place. We know because Samos confirms that this is the very same one that they found behind the door. This is a big point toward a certain time travel concept, as this Rift Rider is something that is created that then influences things in the past, which then influences things again in the future. Also, when in the future the gang and the player encounter a younger Samos and a younger Jak. This is significant because the Jak and Samos that came from the past are older than the two that we encounter. We find out and eventually see that they eventually send their younger selves back into the past to live out until they make it back to the future. So in this instance, the loop stays intact. Jak, Samos, and the Rift Rider are from the future, but they will always go back into the past to then come back to the future again. This then results in them sending their younger selves back again, completing the loop. Clear as mud? With these findings, we can see that the type of time travel that is used in Jak and Daxter is most likely closed-loop time travel. Now, it's time to tackle the topic that might be the most misunderstood and difficult thing to determine from what the series gives us. Is Jak Mar? Yes. No. Maybe. Kinda. Let's look at the facts. Jak is a boy who has special powers and is inherently related to the precursors in some way. This is known to us from the very beginning. This is also exactly what we see from the Legend of Mar. Jak is also originally named Mar, which we find out at the end of the third game. This then led to the line that most fans point to, which has confused everyone for the longest time.
Wait, Jak is Mar? The Mar?
There are also some cut scenes in the script for Jak 2 that have been released, but I will not be taking these into account because it is not a direct confirmation since the scene was cut and it's therefore unofficial. Otherwise, when looking in game, there are roughly 3 streams of thought when it comes to how Jak can be Mar. When he sends himself back into the past, the kid, which is young Jak, grows up to become Mar. We know this cannot happen because, as we've established by the clues from the previous section, Jak cannot grow up to be Mar and simultaneously grow up to be the Jak we play as in the Precursor Legacy Jak 2 and Jak 3. Jak leaves the Precursors and time travels back to the point in Jak 3 after having done everything as Mar. There are a couple of reasons this one doesn't work. Firstly, time still passes for the person who is time traveling. If Jak went with the Precursors and traveled to the past and lived there doing all the things Mar would do, then he would come back older when he returned to the moment the Precursor ship leaves. The other point revolves around the fact that Jak never talks about any adventures or anything involving the Precursors after Jak 3. If he had gone on any adventures or time traveled, we most likely would have heard about it, even if it was some throwaway piece of dialogue. The third one, which I feel like is the most plausible explanation for this, is that Jak, after all the adventures we see him in, finds a way to time travel back in time and become Mar. This theory, while the easiest to explain, relies on one very important question. Initially, I want to say no. When we hear Core at the beginning of the game, he exclaims that he's been waiting for the last rift gate to be found and opened. The rift gate that we travel through at the beginning of the story of Jak 2 is the last one needed to be found by the metalheads. This would mean that all the other ones are known and could have already been used. It is possible that there are others out there which can still be utilized, but it is highly unlikely. There are multiple times where it is referenced by Metalcore that the battle with Mar and the precursors had spanned different times, and even that various precursor artifacts had been sent to different times. Of course, a lot of this is speculation.
The last precursor egg. Mar was clever. He covered his tracks well through time, hiding his last egg from me and building the shield and city to defend it.
On top of that, the Rift Rider or some other ship equivalent would also be needed to propel him into the rift and send him through time. The problem with this is that humans in Jak and Daxter do not have the technology to produce things on the same level as precursors. At least, not that we've seen in any of the games. We would need an equivalent of the Heart of Mar and Time Map in order to make a functioning ship to get Jak to the past. That would have to also come after finding another operational rift gate. This then brings us to the conclusion of the video. Do I think Jak is Mar? I think how I've talked about the various scenarios and some other comments on my last video would clue you into what I think. However, I am not a stick in the mud when it comes to possibilities. I think it is possible, though highly unlikely, that Jak could potentially find a rift gate and someone could create the parts necessary to send him back to the past and become Mar. I think that is a possibility, but I think that while it is a possibility, it would have to come after the entire series that we have up to this point. I think the notion that any of the games that we currently have give us enough evidence to definitively say that Jak and Mar are the same character is just not strong enough. I think if you want a definitive answer from me about what I know, I do not think Jak is Mar, but I do think that Jak's uncle is an ancestor of Jak and will lead somewhere to Mar in the bloodline, which would then eventually lead to Jak. So hopefully that makes sense. And remember, if you're not toasted with toasted mushroom, you're just baked.